Simon Danchuk is with us. Interesting one here, Simon. 2 million people have been claiming sickness benefit for at least 5 years with no work requirements. So you mentioned welfare spending in the last section. I mean, this is crazy. You've got 3 million people claiming universal credit with no obligation to seek work, up from 700,000 in 2020. I mean, we are heading towards an iceberg of a welfare problem in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's got dramatically worse since the pandemic. So I think it was 700,000 people in 2020, January 2020, claiming universal credit who could, who were well enough to work. And that's gone up to 3.1 million over about 3 or 4 years. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And that's been a real failure of government to get on top of this. It's not that long ago. We used to challenge people who weren't in work, who were of working age. They might have had a health condition of some kind. But many of those people can still do certain kinds of work. But now nobody's being challenged to get back into work. And it's become a lifestyle culture that people just buy into. And I suspect that they top up their benefits by working in what we might call the informal economy. I mean, the taxpayer can't just keep spending on this. It's incredibly bad.
And I don't, for 1 second, pretend it's an easy thing to try and sort out. And, when you start getting into people's health issues and the mental health thing, which has, really kind of usurped everything else in this respect. And there is not unreasonably some suspicion as to what constitutes mental health. If somebody has a mental health problem, I'd be the first in line to say we need to help that person. What bothers me is that we've got some of those people who will claim a mental health issue, and in fact somebody called it the new bad back of excuses, and I think there's genuinely something in that.
Oh, I think that's exactly the part of the problem. I think we need to get GPs, who are often signing people off, to be more challenging in their approach. We pay them to do this work on behalf of the state, and they should do a good job in that. There's been far too many civil servants working from home, so many civil servants through the Department for Work and Pensions aren't actually meeting the claimants anymore, which is a real issue. So that needs to change. There has to be a culture change within the civil service and within the state that's operating this system, so that those that are swinging the lead, as we used to say, are challenged much more than they are doing. We can't afford to carry on spending the amount of money. And I have to say, I think the minister responsible, Liz Kendall, who's going to make 1 or 2 announcements in the next month or so, I think she will really challenge this, just because the money doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, there is the problem. The money doesn't exist. Where do we go from there? There is money at the BBC, though, and they've been accused of using the son of a Hamas government minister to narrate its documentary, which was purporting to showcase ordinary people of Palestine. Let's have a listen to this short section.
Everything's changed since the war started. I was in the best school in Gaza, the British school in the north. All my lessons were in English. Now I'm here living in a tent.
This is our new way of transportation.
So here's the problem, Simon. That is young Abdullah, who's clearly very good in front of the camera. He speaks very well. Sounds like, very educated young man for someone who's been living in a war zone. Well, it turns out there's good reason for that. That's because he's essentially the sort of Gazan equivalent of Prince Harry. This is a guy who's the son of one of the most senior Hamas government ministers, who was selected by the BBC to narrate and front a documentary. I'm not sure that's the authentic face of what is happening out there. The BBC say we ain't done anything wrong here. They defended it, saying that stating it had editorial control and no input from the children's parents. It's a bit of an iffy look, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think the BBC have got this badly wrong. This is the son of a Hamas government minister that they've used. And this isn't in a short news clip. This was in a lengthy documentary. And the BBC camera people were following this young guy, 14-year-old, around Gaza for several months with an older person who claimed to have been his father. Turns out he was his uncle. I mean, why the BBC would think that that was acceptable, I do not know. The standards within the BBC in terms of broadcast have slipped considerably, and it's been really shown up during this Israel-Gaza conflict, and this is a perfect example of it.
A perfect example indeed. And what about this as a perfect example of the changing world we live in terms of who gets cast in which roles? This is the story of Cynthia Erivo. She, of course, has been nominated for an Oscar for her role as the green-skinned witch Elfa in the film adaptation of the musical Wicked. Let's have a little listen, if we can, to Cynthia in action. A super talented young lady. She's from Stockwell in the UK. I've followed her career before anybody had ever heard of her. Saw her in The Colour Purple, just around the corner at a theatre from here a few years ago. Incredible talent. But she's now been selected, she's British-Nigerian, now been selected to play the role of Jesus in an up-and-coming stage production of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, I know what everybody's thinking out here. Hang on a second. Well, you know, was Jesus white? Was he black? Some people have always claimed that he was probably what we would call, in today's sense, maybe a mixed race. But regardless of that, and that bit I don't think is the issue. Jesus was a bloke, right? I mean, that, I think, is the problem.
Well, there'd certainly be complaints if I got the role of the witch in Wicked, wouldn't there? For various reasons, probably. But you've got to laugh at this. It's ironic that this is being staged. The role she's playing Jesus in is in Los Angeles, the war capital of the United States. I actually take a very relaxed view about this. You know, this is art. Leave it to the audience to decide whether they want to pay money to see a woman, a black woman, playing Jesus. That's up to them. But on a slightly serious point, it is interesting that those on the left would be very defensive of Islam. We have to be very careful and cautious about how we address their issues. But when it comes to Christianity, anything goes. You know, that's the irony of all this. I'm happy to be relaxed about this sort of matter, but that should apply as much to the Muslim faith as it does to the Christian faith. And I think that's where these issues get a bit more complex.
Indeed. We live in changing times. David Ball, who's one of the presenters here at Talk, as you will know, Simon, has just got the role of playing Nelson Mandela on a national tour. So, you know, it can happen to anybody, clearly. Listen, Simon, thank you. Simon Danchuk with us here on the programme. Always good to engage Simon's views along the way.